Good evening. My name is Kenny Young, and I'm this year's chair for the VIP Distinguished Speaker Series. The VIP Distinguished Speaker Series is one of the many programs put on by the Undergraduate Business Council for the McCombs School of Business. Today we are joined by Dean Laura Starks, Dean of the McCombs School of Business, and Commissioner Michael Piwowar of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. We'll begin tonight with an interview between Dean Starks and Commissioner Piwowar, then we'll open up the floor for Q&A from the audience. As a reminder, today's event will end promptly at 6:30 p.m. We would greatly appreciate if you could refrain from leaving early and using your electronic devices. Michael Piwowar was appointed by President Barack Obama to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and was sworn in on August 15, 2013. Most recently, Commissioner Piwowar was a Republican chief economist for the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. He was the lead Republican economist on the 4 SEC-related titles of the DoddFrank Act and the Jobs Act. Piwowar also worked on a number of important SEC-related oversight issues under the jurisdiction of the committee, such as securities, over-the-counter derivatives, investor protection, market structure, and capital formation. During the financial crisis and its immediate aftermath, Piwowar served in a 1-year fixed-term position at the White House as senior economist at the President's Council of Economic Advisors in both the Bush and Obama administrations. Before joining the White House, Piwowar worked as a principal at the Securities Litigation Consulting Group, where he provided economic consulting to law firms involved in complex securities litigation. Before that, Piwowar was an assistant professor of finance at Iowa State University, where he focused his research on market microstructure and taught undergraduate and graduate courses in corporate finance and investments. He published with a number of articles in leading academic publications and received several teaching and research awards. Commissioner Piwowar received a BA in Foreign Services and International Politics from Penn State, an MBA from Georgetown University, and a PhD in Finance from Penn State as well. Without further ado, please help me welcome Dean Starks and Commissioner Piwowar.
Thank you, Kenny, and welcome, Mike. We really appreciate your being here. And we got him to do a hook 'em horns earlier, so we have a picture of him doing this.
Yeah. Even though I went to Penn State and taught at Iowa State, I still do the hook 'em horns.
So the first question is, after you received your undergraduate degree, what was your first job?
Sure. So first of all, I need to do a quick disclaimer, right? So I have to say that any of the views I express reflect only my own personal views and not necessarily any views of anyone else at the commission. And the reason why I have to say that is because I have one of my counsels here who's a lawyer, and secondly, because I tend to disagree with my colleagues every once in a while. So, having said that. My first job out of undergraduate. So I was a liberal arts major undergraduate. I thought I was going to go into the Foreign Service. And I did an undergraduate, and I did an internship at the State Department. And I very quickly learned that if you worked really hard in the State Department, you got to be an ambassador of a country that hates the United States. And the only way to be an ambassador to a country that likes the United States was to go out, go in the business world, make a bunch of money, and donate it to the guy who becomes president. And that's how you get that job. And so at that point, I knew I wasn't going to go into working in the State Department. So I got a job at a bank, but because I had a liberal arts degree, they would only let me into branch management. They wouldn't let me go into commercial lending or any of the other really good areas within the bank. And I was there after a couple years. I realized that I didn't want to have my boss's job. I didn't want to have my boss's job or his job. And so I thought if I want to get serious about getting a job in the business world, I had to go back and get an MBA. And so my first job, what I learned in working from there was that I needed to go back and get a business degree. So you all are already one step ahead of where I was coming out of undergraduate.
So you've had a number of very different jobs throughout your career. My favorite is being a finance professor. But what set you apart, and in particular, how did you get the job of SEC Commissioner? Because that is like an incredible job.
Yeah. So it's not like I, was sitting as an undergraduate going, I want to be an SEC Commissioner, right? I had zero plan for what I was going to do. And I always followed my passion. For my undergraduate, I thought about going into the Foreign Service and realized that was not the direction. Then I went back and got an MBA. And I decided that I liked applied economics and applied statistics. And it turns out I had a really good mentor there, Dr. David Walker at Georgetown, who said basically finance is just applied economics and applied statistics. And from there I decided to go on and get a PhD. And I think what sets me apart was that I've followed my passion. I could have stayed at the bank and had a very safe, easy career there, worked my way up. I had no doubt that I could have been successful there, but I would have been bored. I would not have been doing what I wanted to do. And so I took chances. I went, I went back to graduate school right after I got married, and my wife, God love her, put us through graduate school. We lived, very meek in a one-bedroom apartment. Went back, got a PhD, got paid, I think, $1,000 a month for an assistantship. She also, stayed on and worked as well too. And then when I went out into academia, I decided that in order to get serious about the research that I was doing, I did what was called market microstructure. I needed to go somewhere like the SEC and visit there and learn more about what they were doing. And so I worked with the SEC as an economist for 4 years. From there, I got interested in doing litigation consulting. I left and went to the private sector. And then from there, somebody called me one day and said, "Do you want to interrupt your life and go work at the White House?" And my first response was, no. And then my second response was, that would be really cool. And so I think what separates me is like, you know what, I'll take that chance and I'll go work at the White House. And the way it was pitched to me in May of 2008 was, we just had Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns had just gone bankrupt in March of 2008. President Bush is on his way out and wants to be on record for principles for financial regulatory reform before something bad happens. And I went to the White House in August of 2008. I had accepted the job in May, went in August, and something bad happened, the global financial crisis. And was there during the financial crisis in the White House, stayed on for another 6 months to work for President Obama, had the opportunity to go back to consulting, but also I knew that financial regulatory reform was heating up on the Hill, and I had really gotten interested in that. And so then I went to Capitol Hill, again followed my passion at that point in time, worked on Capitol Hill. And then from there, the opportunity to be a commissioner popped up. It's not something I could have planned. It was just being opportunistic with respect to, taking chances with moving my career.
So during the financial crisis, were you one of the ones that was operating on almost no sleep for months?
That's correct. So there were times, so my kids at the time were 8 and 6. And there were weeks on end when I literally did not see them awake. I would get up in the morning when they were still sleeping, and I would go into work, and my BlackBerry would be buzzing with, "You got to write this memo that has to go to the president today to explain why this bank is in trouble, or what's going on with TED spreads, or what's going on in this credit market that no one's ever heard of before, or what's going on in this country," and those sorts of things. And I would be there all night, or all afternoon, all evening, and I'd come home at night, and they would be asleep again. And then just repeat 7 days a week for weeks on end during all of this. At the time, we were living the financial crisis in real time. And one of the things I learned from that was that it turned out, people can today sit back and Monday morning quarterback in terms of decisions that were made from key policymakers. Part of my job was to try to inform the president in order to make good decisions, and then there were other people informing other key people as well too. What I really learned from that was that our government, the financial regulators, really had no idea in terms of what the real exposures were for the financial institutions that were out there. And so that drives a lot of what are the ideas that I'm pushing as a regulator now, which is regulatory transparency. We need better information, we need better data, so that our policymakers can make good informed decisions in real time.
Is there something you haven't yet mastered that you'd like to?
That's a good question. I'd like to play steel guitar in a country band. I just always thought it would be cool. I'd love to play the Ace in the Hole band with George Strait. I don't know anyone that's ever played steel guitar. I've never sat down and do it. I just always thought it looked cool. The guy who just sat there and had the things on his fingers and played it, and I love country music, and so I think I'd like to do that.
Look forward to seeing you do that. So how has the SEC changed since you started there a couple of years ago?
Sure. So when I was there before as an economist, so I was there from 2002 to 2004. Before the financial crisis, the SEC was a sleepy little agency. We had gotten some press because we had to implement Sarbanes-Oxley, so that was in the wake of Enron and WorldCom and so some of the other accounting scandals that were going on. And there was a little bit of heavy lifting in terms of regulation that was going on at the SEC, but not too much. And a lot of the rulemaking that was done was discretionary. So it was the commissioners would get together, the 5 commissioners, decide that an area that they needed to either new regulation or got together with the staff and decided there was outmoded regulation that they needed to fix. And it was largely driven from the SEC. Fast forward to 2013, when I came in as commissioner 2 years ago, discretionary rulemaking is basically out the window at this point in time. Because 5 years ago, Congress passed something called DoddFrank. Right? Many of you have heard about this. It was the single biggest change in terms of financial regulation in the history of the United States. And Dodd-Frank was 2,319 pages, and it told all of the financial regulators, and we have a very diverse financial regulatory framework. We have the SEC, we have the CFTC as the other markets regulator, we have 3 banking regulators, we have a housing finance regulator, we have consumer finance, all these different regulators. It told us collectively, Dodd-Frank told us to promulgate about 400 new rules, of which the SEC is responsible on an individual or a joint basis sometimes with some of the agencies for about 100 of them. Now, 5 years have passed since Dodd-Frank was enacted. We are only about 2/3 of the way done with finalizing our rules under Dodd-Frank. What does that mean? It means we have 1/3 of our rules yet to get written. That means that staff time and commissioner time, almost all of that, in terms of on the policy side, is taken up by mandated Dodd-Frank rulemaking. It doesn't give us a lot of time or ability to actually engage in discretionary rulemaking. That is probably the biggest change I've seen. The other change I've seen is just the sheer amount of work in addition to the rulemaking that we have to do. So in the wake of the financial crisis, there were a lot of things that are done at the international level through what's called the G20. So the leaders of the largest 20 economies in the United States get together and decide on various work streams or ideas that they want to facilitate harmonization and regulatory framework, those types of things. And that bubbles down to these international organizations called IOSCO, which are securities regulators, the Financial Stability Board, which is mostly bankers and other types of financial regulators on that then have all these work streams that then cause the SEC to work on these issues. And so not only are we writing rules, but Europe is writing rules and Asia is writing rules, and these international frameworks try to harmonize some of these rules together. And that sheer amount of work is a big change that I've seen as well too. And then finally, the biggest change I think is the relationship with the regulators and the industry. It used to be before the financial crisis, there was more of a collaborative relationship between the regulators and the regulated entities. And as an economist, I'm always worried about what's called regulatory capture. You worry about regulators being captured by the industry that we're intended to regulate. But even with that, there's some sort of collaborative nature. The vast majority of institutions, individuals out there want to be compliant, want to figure out what the rules of the game are. That's why they hire law firms. That's why they hire compliance consultants. Tell us what the rules of the games are. We want to comply. After the financial crisis, it's been more of a confrontational type of thing. More of, well, you got 99 things right, but we're going to ding you on the one that you got wrong. And I think that's not healthy either. That I think those are probably the 3 biggest changes, I think.
So have the suits against the SEC on cost-benefit analysis been more since the financial crisis?
Yeah, excellent question. So for those of you not familiar with cost-benefit analysis and the suits of the SEC, what happens when we promulgate rules, right? Our government, we have a number of checks and balances in our government that's built in, right? So what's the checks and balances that are built into an independent agency? We're not part of any of the 3 branches of government. Well, we have something called judicial review. We have to follow something called the Administrative Procedure Act, which is a law that tells us how we need to go forward with our rulemaking. So we can't do it in secret. We can't do anything that's arbitrary and capricious that focuses just on one particular firm. We have to do what's called cost-benefit analysis, where we have to go through and write down what is the market failure, what is the baseline for which we're going to judge what we're going to do in terms of rulemaking, what are alternatives to the current rulemaking that we're doing, and what are the costs and benefits of those. And in the past, in the early 2000s, the SEC had been sued by trade associations representing individual firms because the SEC had not done cost-benefit analysis. The SEC has largely been a lawyer-driven agency. It is still dominated by lawyers. It makes sense because we administer and enforce the federal securities laws. But the group of economists at the SEC has gotten much bigger. When I was there, it was maybe 40. Now it's well over 100 economists who are now charged with doing economic analysis in our rulemaking. It used to be the cost-benefit analysis that was done in rulemaking was done what we call on the back end. It was justifying a decision that was already made by the lawyers. Now the economists are embedded with the rulemaking team from the beginning and are working with the rulemaking team. That's helping to rationalize the rules that come out. It makes our rule proposals, our releases a little bit longer because we have to justify what we're doing and talk about the different alternatives that are there, but it ultimately it ends up in better rulemaking. We have been challenged less in recent years because of that, because we're enhancing the role of the economists, which is a good thing.
So how would you assess trust in financial markets today relative to before the financial crisis?
Yeah, so I would say that now I think there's a healthy dose of skepticism with respect to Wall Street or financial markets in general. I would argue that before the financial crisis, there was too much trust in the financial system. There was too much trust in the regulators to get it right. There was too much trust in institutions like credit rating agencies to get what they were doing right. Even to the extent where if you look at, the fact that credit rating agencies were so wrong on so many structured products, the reason why that mattered is because so many institutions out there that had fiduciary duties to their investors had basically outsourced those fiduciary duties to the credit rating agencies without doing their own due diligence. There was almost too much trust in that getting done. There was too much trust that the banking regulators were watching the banks to make sure that they had adequate capital and adequate liquidity to deal with a downturn in, say, the housing market and those types of things. I think that the pendulum has swung, that now that there is a healthy dose of skepticism. My fear, however, is that with so many new regulations going in and so many false narratives about what caused the crisis, that we're going to swing back to the point where people are going to put too much trust in regulators and too much trust in international organizations that are coordinated with regulators to actually prevent the next crisis. And I think that's going to sow the seeds actually for the next crisis. So what we need to do is make sure that we keep that healthy dose of skepticism.
So the global landscape for financial markets has been changing rapidly, and partly with these different regulations. And as we tighten our regulations, do you worry about the competitiveness of the U.S. financial markets?
Yes, absolutely. We have been, the gold standard in the world in terms of having the widest and deepest capital markets for a long time. But the rest of the world is catching up. And I like to use the analogy of USA basketball. So, it used to be the case for the Olympics, we would just throw out a bunch of collegians and win the gold medal in basketball because we were so much better than the rest of the world. Well, it turned out the rest of the world caught up to us, and now all of a sudden we got to have a dream team of all of our best professionals that are out there, right? The same thing is happening in terms of competitiveness in capital markets. We've always been ahead of the game compared to other markets around the world. But I was just, last year I was in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Dubai wants to be the next Singapore. Singapore wants to be the next London. Hong Kong wants to be the next New York. Everyone wants to be the next one to take over the global financial markets. They are very conscious of the fact that capital can move very quickly. Things like exchanges are all electronic, and those things can be moved very quickly. Overseas, people can trade different securities in different markets all around the world. And I'm very conscious of the fact that if we lose competitiveness in our markets, if we over-regulate, things are going to move elsewhere, right? So if you think about it, one of the reasons why we want to regulate is to have well-functioning capital markets, and we want to the extent that we have the transactions occurring here, we want to see that, and to the extent that the regulators think that there's too much risk or something is going afoul and that we can do something about it, Well, if we over-regulate to the point where those transactions go elsewhere, we don't see them. And we never get to see emerging trends in the markets. And so by over-regulating on the front end, we lose some of the benefits of regulation on the back end.
So one of the innovations in the last decade or so has been the high-frequency trading. And how do you think the high-frequency trading has changed the way SEC regulates financial markets?
Sure. So that's right. So high-frequency trading is, I think of it as a subset of a more general phenomenon that we see of algorithmic trading. So particularly in the equity markets, but we also see it in commodity markets, in foreign exchange markets, in futures markets, and we see it all over the world. We see more trading is done by computer algorithms and less trading done by individuals on the floor of, say, a stock exchange. You know, most floors have closed anyway, and so we have electronic trading. And high-frequency trading is just the ability to trade very quickly, put orders in, cancel orders, submit orders somewhere else, and all that. And the honest answer is we still do not have a good idea as to whether high-frequency traders are causing some of these liquidity events that we had. So, for example, we had a flash crash in the equity markets in May of 2010. Last year, in the Treasury market, there was a flash crash. High-frequency traders are in that market as well, too. We still don't have a good idea, a good handle on whether high-frequency traders are causing these events, whether someone else is causing them and they're exacerbating these events, or whether perhaps that they're actually helping to mitigate some of these events in these cases. Or maybe it's the case that it's a little bit of both. And this goes back to my earlier point about regulatory transparency. One of the things we learned from the May 2010 flash crash is that the SEC does not have a very good consolidated view of audit trail, what we call audit trail of an order. So somebody places an order with their broker, and that broker routes a trade to an exchange, or routes it to an alternative trading system, or to another broker, and it gets broken up and all that. We don't have a good way of sort of following that order through without going out and talking to each one of the places individually and sort of piecing this puzzle together. And so a long-term change that we're working on is working with the exchanges to come up with something called the consolidated audit trail, which is going to be very costly for the industry. It's going to take a number of years for it to get implemented. But at the end of this, what we're going to do is have the ability to follow an order all the way through, and we're going to be able to see better the role of high-frequency traders in the market. In the meantime, we can see real-time transactions occurring, and we have folks that are studying this market very closely. But we still don't have a good handle on some of the things that's going on with them.
So one of the things the SEC relies on is the ethical practices of the corporations and the financial institutions that you oversee. What do you think that the heads of those corporations and financial institutions can do to make sure that they have high ethical standards for their practices?
Well, first is lead by example. And second, and this is something that stuck with me when I was an MBA student. So I did my MBA at Georgetown in the 90s, and we were required to take an ethics class there, which a bunch of us just sort of rolled our eyes and said, oh, geez, why do we have to take this class? But it was actually one of the most enjoyable classes, and one of the things I learned from that was that one of the single most important thing that a CEO can do in order to encourage ethical behavior from the employees is tell people what the guidelines are. Like, this is ethical and this is not. Tell people where the lines are. That in and of itself, you think it's very simple, but just training and saying, it's like, look, this is insider trading, this is not insider trading. You need to go in front of a compliance officer. These types of just telling people what the rules of the game are. Most people want to comply with the rules, and it's oftentimes what you find is people who engage in unethical behavior. A lot of times it's not the first mistake. The first mistake is inadvertent. The second mistake is trying to cover it up and doing more unethical behavior. And by that time they sort of dig themselves a hole, whether it's a rogue trader or somebody else trying to cover up on the stuff. But on the front end, if you explain to people, look, this is behavior we're not going to tolerate, or this is behavior that's not right. Maybe it's technically legal, but we're just not going to do it. Most people will comply with that, and I think setting the tone from the top is a way to do that.
So what do you see as the role of organizational social responsibility in society today?
We have a number of, when you think of public companies, right, I'm of the view that, you know, public companies, you know, shareholders own the company. They're the residual claimants of the company. And it's up to shareholders to either vote with their feet or to go through the board of directors to, you know, to vote their conscience or whatever they want to do to try to, you know, companies do certain things. Also, there's opportunities for companies out there to choose to do various things. If they think that something is socially responsible but is also very profitable, there's opportunities to go in that space as well too. There's plenty of opportunities to do that sort of thing and let companies, you know, go that direction and decide, you know, which way they want to do. By the same token, you know, investment advisors, investment companies have set up a number, you know, on the investment side for people who want to diversify their holdings, and they've set up, you know, funds that, you know, won't invest in companies that engage in certain activities that allow for people who don't believe in those activities to invest their money in companies that don't go with those activities, and you know, that's a great thing.
I want to ask a few more questions about you before I run out of time, and I don't have much time. So what's the best piece of advice that you were ever given?
Don't be afraid to admit that you don't know something. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. Or don't be afraid in a meeting when somebody says a buzzword and everyone kind of nods their head to say, well, what do you mean by that? Right? It turns out, I'll give you a little secret about finance, right? For those of you in finance, right? The more buzzwords somebody uses, the less they actually know what they're talking about. Right? I found that in whether it's in academia, whether it's in the private sector, or whether it's on Capitol Hill. And one of my favorite things to do is, because I'm comfortable, I don't know everything, I can't know everything. That's why I have 4 really smart lawyers working for me, right? So first is the ability to say, I can't know everything, I don't know everything, and you have to hire good people and trust them on that sense. But one of my favorite things to do in meetings when people start using buzzwords is say, well, what do you mean by that? And if they look at you and just repeat themselves louder the same word again, they don't know what they're talking about at that point, right? And sometimes the ability to ask the right question is more important than trying to be the person who always has the right answer. Because if you're always trying to prove yourself as to say, well, I know everything, and yeah, well, I'll pretend to know this sort of stuff, you can get yourself into trouble, and that's where a lot of mistakes can happen. But just say, well, yeah, I'm a little confused by that. Can you explain this to me a little bit? Can you break it down a little bit? And then you really get a sense that, well, maybe other people didn't understand that as well too. And you'd be amazed how many people come up to you and say, well, thanks for asking that question, I didn't understand it either. And you'd be amazed that, you know, it's not a career killer. In fact, it's, you know, people will look at you and say, you know what, this is someone who's comfortable with themselves enough to ask those questions or admit that they don't know the answers to those things.
So in a similar vein, what makes a person stand out to you as you're evaluating them? So when what can the students do when they first start their job to stand out? To stand out
from someone, right? So, excellent question. Well, first of all, right, so if you're thinking, you know, on a resume, trying to, you know, look good in terms of, you know, for future employers and stuff too, right? Well, first of all, being from the McCombs School of Business, right? That's already, boom, that's already put you in that elite sort of thing, right? Then it's not only joining clubs, but showing that you can take leadership in those clubs, right? I'll give you a little secret out in the business world. Nobody cares which Greek letters you have or whether you had Greek letters or not. What matters is whether you held leadership positions in the clubs or fraternities or sororities or whatever else, because that shows that you're willing to sort of step up and take on extra responsibility. That's the kind of thing that matters. In terms of when I observe people, you know, just basic knowledge of the subject. I mean, you would be surprised at how many folks that, you know, try to impress somebody by doing certain things, but when you just start asking them the basic, you understand basic accounting, basic finance. I have 4 lawyers who work for me. They need to know the law, right? That's first and foremost, right? And I have 4 really smart lawyers who know the 4 different statutes of the SEC very, very well. And then a willingness to go the extra mile as well too. You know, well, that's not my job. That's not going to cut it with anybody. You know, doing something above and beyond, or when somebody asks you to do something, you say, well, that's kind of beneath me. That's not the right answer, right? Just saying, okay, here you go, and be willing to pitch in and be part of the team. Those are the kinds of things for me that stand out.
thank you. And I think now it's time for, to open it up for your questions. So if you have a question, they will bring Mike around to you.
Thank you for coming out too. It's a real pleasure having you at UT campus. Really appreciated that piece of advice on buzzwords. I'm definitely going to have to use that, especially with MBA classes and lots of buzzwords we're using right now. One thing I wanted to ask you, you talked about transparency and also regulations in financial services. What are your thoughts on a lot of the new financial technology companies that are coming out that are trying to implement things that help with a lot of that data gathering and transparency?
Yeah.
And particularly groups like Financial Innovators Now, the Googles, the Apples, and a lot of these innovators are trying to implement these.
That's great. So, first of all, with respect to the buzzwords, don't ever use the word synergy in front of me. It doesn't make sense. If you're justifying something by synergy, it's the wrong answer, right? That's always the wrong answer. Mergers and acquisitions, why are these stupid? Synergy, those types of things. I think technology, it's amazing how it's enabling and empowering investors for things, right? And so you got companies out there that are they're not only taking data, but providing analytics to give investors better information, whether it's accounting information or investing information. One of the things, the SEC, we're actually trying to enable more of that. And I'll give you an example. So we have something called the EDGAR system. So these are all the company filings we get. So under the Securities Act of 1933, companies, if you want to sell your securities to the public, there's a bunch of filings they need to do. So think of their annual reports, 10Ks, proxy statements, their quarterly reports, all that sort of stuff. And traditionally that was done by paper-based. They would send it into the SEC, and we had a library, anybody could come see it, or other libraries could get it, or if you're at a university, you had to go look on microfilm or microfiche, because people would take pictures of it, that sort of stuff. So previously, then the SEC said, all right, well, we got this new thing called the internet coming in. Well, we'll allow people to file ASCII text files with us, right? So EDGAR was set up for us to take in information. But for an investor trying to use that thing, I don't know if you've ever gone to the SEC's website and you look up company filings and you type in a company ticker symbol. And what does it do? It gives you a chronological list of a bunch of filings that have a bunch of codes that nobody understands what any of them mean. Like what's a DEF 14A or 424B4, B3, those sorts of things, right? The SEC, we're embarking on an EDGAR monetization product, and we're embarking on doing more of the information that we get from required filings, not only the corporate side, but from mutual funds and investment advisors in what's called structured data, so XML format or XBRL format, in ways that then will enable folks to then build front-end tools like Google or some of those other companies that are out there. There's a company called Workiva, for example, that's been working on financial filings as well too, that I happened to talk to folks in there recently. So we're doing what we can to enable those types of things. Try to provide better information. So when somebody goes in and looks at a company, it's not just a flat file, and it may be layered data, all those types of things, so that you can pull out the data that you want to be able to make informed decisions. So I think that's going to empower investors more than we know.
Hi, thanks so much for coming to speak to us. I guess recently the NASDAQ embraced the blockchain technology to power their private trading platform. I was wondering what your opinions on the blockchain are and how do you think it will affect the SEC going forward?
Right. So going back to my answer about not being afraid to say you don't understand something, I do not understand blockchain technology at all. However, having said that, right, there are so many people that are investing in this blockchain, right? So we've been looking at, like, say, Bitcoin and other things in a number of ways. Like, first of all, what is Bitcoin? Is it a security? Does it fall under our jurisdiction? Is it a commodity? Does it fall under CFTC? And then very quickly learn about this blockchain technology on the back end of this stuff.
I have no idea what y'all are talking about.
So this is what I was saying. So I'm going to show you that I don't know. So I'll try to give a quick summary. So the way it works, this blockchain technology, is a bunch of dispersed computers, and if you and I do a transaction, all of this information gets stored in what's called blockchain for everyone else to see, so that we can keep track of ownership. Okay? And it's being done mostly in these virtual currencies is where it first started. But other people have said that, well, we can do this in a way, instead of doing our current clearance and settlement for, say, stock certificates, which run through the DTCC, which is, takes 2 days to go through or 3 days to go through the clearance and settlement process. Perhaps this will be a new way, a new architecture, so we get an instantaneous clearance and settlement on these things. And there are a number of people in the financial sector that are buying into this technology, and there are a number of fervent people in this sort of stuff. NASDAQ, you brought up, they have a thing called the private market, which is a smaller market they have for private securities, and they've embraced this blockchain technology as a way potentially to do for the clearance and settlement, if I remember correctly on this. For me personally, I want to see, this is an interesting experiment on this one. We're going to people advocating all the time. The SEC needs to completely change its rules for this new blockchain technology. It's still very mysterious to a number of people, but it still has potentially a lot of upside on the side. So I'll be interested to see what happens with that. There's some other folks that are within the financial sector that are buying into this as well too. So we'll see. It's a wait and see approach, basically.
Hello. So at the beginning of this speech, you gave us a disclaimer that some of your opinions are not the same as the rest of the SEC. So I was wondering if you could tell us about one that is the most controversial you have in terms of compared to the rest of the SEC, or something you've had a lot of backlash on.
Do you want an alphabetical list? Or
whatever your favorite story is.
Yeah, sure. So just quick background on that. So the way the SEC, there's 5 of us that are commissioners. The president can only name, by statute, can only name 3 from his own party. So he stuck with me as one of the 2 Republican commissioners at the SEC, right? Now, most of the time in the history of the SEC, it's been consensus-based. We're set up as a sort of a bipartisan commission to try to find consensus. And when I talked about how, on discretionary rulemaking, you try to find consensus and you tend to do 5-0 votes, right? Recently, people have been pointing out that there's a lot of 3-2 votes that tend to cut across party lines. Most of those, the vast majority of those, are DoddFrank rulemakings. And that's not surprising because Dodd-Frank itself was a highly partisan piece of legislation. It broke down along party lines. So a highly partisan piece of legislation that then gets thrown to the regulators to promulgate rules under those, it's not surprising that a lot of those end up to be 3-2 votes. So that's where the most controversial ones come from. I think for me personally, the one that really drives me crazy is something called the CEO pay ratio disclosure. So companies now are required to disclose, and the compliance period doesn't start until a little bit in the future, but we just finished rules that companies have to disclose the CEO pay and the pay of the median worker and the ratio between the 2. Why do I hate that so much? Well, first of all, it provides 0 meaningful information for investors, and it clutters up already too big disclosure documents. Have you guys looked at an annual report or a 10K report from a company recently to try to find useful information in there? There's a bunch of useless boilerplate information in there that is provided because a bunch of lawyers say you have to do it, or the SEC's promulgated rules that say you have to do it, and it's very difficult for investors to find the real information that's in there. The second reason why I find that rule so distasteful, Congress told us to do it, because it was put in by a special interest group solely to name and shame CEOs for their own special interests, and not for anything that helps protect investors or give them better information. And so that's one of the things that drives me crazy on that one. And so there's a whole host of these ones from Dodd-Frank that are there. Having said that, when we do engage in discretionary rulemaking, we get very little bit of time to do that. Very, very just consensus-based. We get along well as a commission. We may fight like cats and dogs on a particular issue. But Kara Stein, one of the Democratic commissioners, is one of my very good friends. We just agree to disagree on some things, and we work together on other ones.
Hi, thanks for coming. You said that one of the biggest changes is that discretionary rulemaking is kind of gone as you're trying to get through Dodd-Frank. In the future, do you see discretionary rulemaking, do you see Dodd-Frank allowing much room for discretionary rulemaking? And if so, like, how do you see that changing again in the next few years once you're through with DoddFrank?
Sure, excellent question. I mean, I think it's going to take us, just my own personal, just looking through this, I think it's going to take at least another 3 years for us to get through all of the DoddFrank rulemaking. Now, having said that, you know, Congress has had an opportunity from the beginning to go back and revisit some of the DoddFrank rules. And it's not only the rules yet to get done, but also the rules that are already done. It's taking a lot of our staff resources, and there are some easy fixes that if Congress could fix to Dodd-Frank, that would help free up some of your resources. I'll give you a quick example. So in Dodd-Frank, there's a lot of provisions in there that give us new authority and new requirements to oversee credit rating agencies. And one of the provisions in there requires our examiners to examine every rating agency every year, and it's very prescriptive and lists, I think, something like 12 different specific things we have to examine every single year for every credit rating agency. Our examiners tell us it takes an entire year to get through that list. So by the time they finish with this year's exam, it's already time to start next year's exam. And they tell us that not every one of those items is very important. Some of those items they could look at every 3 years, every 4 years, but the statute requires us to look at them every year. And our examiners tell us that there are other areas that they would prefer to look at that would actually help better regulate credit rating agencies, make them more informative, you know, help investors in terms of, you know, having better ratings moving forward. But they don't have the time to do that because Dodd-Frank is so prescriptive. And so one thing we keep hoping for is the political tone in Washington to switch to the point where we can actually have sensible conversations about Dodd-Frank fixes, or maybe, you know, repealing some of the provisions that aren't enacted yet, or some tweaking some of these other ones. That hasn't happened yet, unfortunately, because of the political climate. So until that happens, we just have to let the rulemaking run its course. And even when we're done with the rulemaking part of that, we have now more compliance on the back end of these rulemakings as well, too. So it's going to be years and years, I think, before we get back to that sort of more collaborative approach, discretionary rulemaking. And, you know, heaven forbid if we have another financial crisis, because, you know, that'll be thousands more pages and hundreds more rules that we're going to put on us.
Thank you for being here, Commissioner. I was wondering if you could give your opinion. Recent years, we've seen companies like Uber and Facebook stay private much longer than we've seen companies stay private in the past. If you could speak to from your vantage point, why companies are staying private so much longer.
Sure, excellent question. One of the things that people notice is exactly that. The companies are staying private longer and getting higher valuations while they're private. There was something called the Jobs Act that was passed in 2012, one of the rare pieces of bipartisan legislation. Congress passed something, it's called the Jobs Act. It's an acronym for Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. And there was a title in that provision that created something called the IPO on-ramp. And folks taking notice of these types of things, what they said, you know, talking to people, why are you keeping your company private? And a lot of the founders said, well, just the cost of going public skyrocketed. So if you think of just compliance costs generally, like hiring accountants and, you know, CFOs and all that sort of stuff, if you're a private company, it's maybe at this level. As soon as you go public, it jumps up. There's a cliff effect. You now are subject to SEC registration requirements. You have Sarbanes-Oxley to deal with. You have a bunch of other sorts of things. And so in the Jobs Act, this thing called the IPO on-ramp said, all right, newly public companies, we're going to give them an on-ramp, not have this cliff effect. We're going to have scaled regulation into what are called emerging growth companies. Basically, new public companies, as long as you're within, I think it's $1 billion in annual revenue, or 5 years in age of being public, whichever comes first, you can have scaled regulation. And so the idea would be to sort of tip the balance to having these private companies maybe go public a little bit earlier on in the process. We've seen huge successes in the biotech industry. I think something like 80 biotech companies went public immediately after the IPO on-ramp. So that suggests that at least for some, and other industries as well too, that suggests that at least for some companies, the cost of going public related to the benefits of going public were skewed too much on the side of that was too costly relative to the benefits you would get, and the IPO on-ramp sort of tipped the balance for those types of firms that we get. But we still see the unicorns, right? $billion plus valuations of private companies that are out there. And the question is there something more we could do to have them go public? In addition, I've been advocating on the private side, on the private side, we have the SEC has split the world into two classes of investors, what we call accredited investors and non-accredited investors. And basically, non-accredited investors are shut out from investing in these private these private companies until they go public, right? How do we define accredited versus non-accredited? You're accredited if you're rich. If you have a certain net worth or if you have a certain annual income, you're considered an accredited investor and you're allowed to invest in these private offerings. If you're non-accredited, you're not allowed to invest in there. Why? Under the notion that we're protecting, and I put protecting in quotes, non-accredited investors, right? And the reason is some people, the way a lot of people think in Washington is, well, certain securities offerings are just too risky for non-accredited investors to invest in. They could lose a lot of money, so we need to protect them, right? Now, as a finance professor, I know that high risk also means potentially high expected return. What we're doing is we're shutting out non-accredited investors from potentially higher return securities. So now you have a class of investors. I'm not an accredited investor, right? I'm not rich. I can't invest in the Ubers and the other big companies that these billion-dollar valuations and other people can, right? I've been trying to change this notion of risk using what we learned from portfolio theory in finance, is that it's not the risk of an individual security in isolation that matters. What matters also is the correlation with the portfolio that you already have. So it may be the case that we could open up potentially higher risk, but also potentially higher return securities for non-accredited investors. They have their existing portfolio, which may be diversified in the S&P 500 or whatever else it is. And now we can have other securities, even if they're risky in isolation, right? For those of you that are taking investments class and going through the math on this, right? You got the correlation coefficient in there as well too. As long as it's uncorrelated with your existing portfolio, you could potentially increase the expected return of your portfolio with adding little or maybe even no additional risk that's there. And so I've been pushing on advocating. I have sort of more of an extreme view on this. I said we just open them up to everybody. Other people say, well, maybe we can limit, lower the limits a little bit to let people in. But to me, I think those are two ways of sort of attacking the problem.
Hi, thank you for coming. So my question was kind of, I've always wondered how, in an environment like Congress and as it is today, how do really complex pieces of legislation like a DoddFrank get written? And how are they not so weighted down to riders and other pieces of kind of really partisan, like you said, kind of interest groups sticking in their hand in the water? How do these things actually get written, and do you have enough feedback to where you think they're actually effective? And just how does that process work without being so cluttered in all the bickering of Congress?
The simple answer is it is messy, right? It's, people use the analogy of the sausage making, right? You see the sausage being made there, right? There's two basic ways that legislation can get done, and traditionally financial regulatory legislation, things out of the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee, traditionally had been bipartisan by nature. And you get sort of the leaders of the committee sort of agreeing that here's a core set of issues, and you get sort of the extremists on both sides, right? You sort of just elbow them out, and you find enough votes to kind of go down the middle of the process, right? And I had great hope that what ultimately ended up to be DoddFrank was going to follow that sort of process. Unfortunately, what we ended up with was, from my perspective, we had a situation where both houses of Congress were controlled by one party, and the Senate effectively had a supermajority in that one. And so it went very partisan, and they could do what they wanted without having to listen to the other side on that. And then in terms of Chris Dodd getting the votes in the Senate, he did a very effective job in terms of getting members to get votes. What do you want? What do you need? Oh, you want this provision put in? Put it in, right? And what we see in DoddFrank is that there's a bunch of individual pieces of provisions that were put in there. Some were to help out special interests, nothing more, nothing less. Some were actually intended to help, to actually address problems that we identified in the financial sector, in the financial crisis. However, a lot of the provisions were written in a way that it was like a standalone provision thrown in there. And oh, by the way, there may be another provision in Dodd-Frank that kind of already addresses the same thing, so it's unnecessary, or maybe even conflicting. So there's conflicting provisions in Dodd-Frank with respect to, for example, the regulated credit ratings, credit rating agencies. There's provisions in there that basically entrenches credit ratings into what we do. And there's other provisions that say, no, what we need to do is have more competition in this space. And they're sort of competing sort of things. In that case, it was just a simple, what do I need to have your vote on this particular thing? And they put it in there, and that's how the stuff got written and went through, and that's how it got signed. Things like the Jobs Act I mentioned, in response to his question there, that was a bipartisan piece of legislation where different members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, put it together in the House. The president wanted a jobs bill, worked with them to do it, put the thing together, worked on a bipartisan basis, sent it over to the Senate, and then it got passed that way. That was a very different piece of legislation, which got overwhelming bipartisan support. You know, that was thrown in after Dodd-Frank. We had some rulemakings to get done with them. We just finished pretty much our last one. I think that it was our last one on crowdfunding just last week. And so there's sort of two different ways you can get it done. It just depends.
Thank you for your great questions, and thank you, Commissioner, for your answers. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kenny for a gift ceremony.
Thank you very much, Key Starks, Commissioner Piwowar. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to speak with our students. I know that we'll be able to take your lessons about leading by ethical example, being bold and not exactly knowing the answer, and how it really is never too late to learn steel guitar and fly into our own lives. So, as a token of our appreciation, the Undergraduate Business Council would like to present Commissioner Piwowar with a signed replica of the University of Texas Tower in recognition of your participation in the VIP Distinguished Speaker Series. So,
Great, thank you.
And I think we should make the requirement that he leave that on the desk of his counsel who's a Baylor grad.
It is sitting right by the exit to get out of here as quickly as possible.